February 1888, Montana Territory. The forecast tipped toward minus 40 degrees, and the homestead line braced for the sort of winter that swallows fences and kills livestock. Snow rose against the outsides of cabins like a slow, suffocating tide. Neighbors watched the sky and counted bushels. They measured safety in barns and sacks. In one yard, though, a different measure held. An earth-smoothed hatch buried near the root of the lean-to. A patch of disturbed sod that had been worked all summer. Inside that place, the air stayed quiet and almost warm, even as the world froze. Children there slept heavy. The fire in the cabin dimmed, while food stayed safe beneath the ground. They had prepared in a way the others had not. How had one woman's summer of digging become the difference between warmth and loss? While neighbors watched their crops, she spent a summer digging. They called her foolish. Winter would show who was right. That summer, while most hands planted and tended, Martha Hayes took spade and pick and measured the earth. She stripped sod, heaped soil, tamped timbers, and shaped a chamber roughly 8 feet by 12 feet and about 6 feet high inside. People passing the yard barked laughter. A waste of time, they said. Plant more, girl. Her neighbors saw seasons as equations of yield. More seed, more harvest. Martha thought in terms of months. She had watched winter come early in other years. She had seen root crops rot in lofts and meet seize with damp the year the roof leaked. She worked the cellar like a storehouse and a refuge, raised shelving for roots and 3-tier racks for salted meat, a packed clay floor to drain and yet hold humidity, a sod and plank roof to lock in the ground's steady heat. Her methods were not conjured from nowhere. The people of the land had long used earth to steady temperature and preserve food through cold months. Martha adapted what she could learn, covering wood with bark and soil, leaving a low adjustable vent to keep stale air moving, lining bins to keep root vegetables dry but not desiccated. She measured depth by rope, set the entrance on the lee side of the homestead so snow would pile without blocking it, and built a small vestibule to prevent gusts from entering the chamber. Neighbors mocked not only the work, but the logic. Why spend a season below ground when seed in the ground is what will feed you? They asked. Martha answered by measuring differently, not by next harvest, but by the months until next spring. She counted how many winter days she could cover, with stored potatoes, turnips, salted pork, and jars of preserved fruit. As summer folded into autumn, she closed the hatch with a round of sod and straw and tightened the ventilation. Her family moved stores into the cool dark. The neighbors kept their fields and their confidence. The stage was set. They measured their outbuildings by bushels. She measured hers by months. On paper, it can seem strange, burying food in a place that will sit under snow and ice. But Earth is a slow heater. 5 to 7 feet below the surface, the temperature of the soil moves far more slowly than the air above. Martha's chamber, dug to roughly 6 feet below grade with an 8 by 12 foot footprint, used the ground's thermal mass to keep the interior near freezing but not below it, comfortable for roots and for salted meats. Measurements gathered later by neighbors showed stable interior readings around 38 degrees through the worst weeks. Her construction had several deliberate parts. First, depth and mass. The more earth over the chamber, the greater the thermal damping. Second, layering. Floor packed with dry sand and clay to shed water, but hold humidity. Shelving lifted produce off the floor on cedar slats. Bins lined with straw to keep roots from touching cold stone. Third, insulation above. A plank roof, then birch bark, then a 3-inch layer of packed sod finished with straw. That roof alone cut conductive heat loss and kept ground moisture from dripping into stores. Fourth, controlled ventilation, a small inlet near the floor, and a higher vent running through a short pipe to the outside. Adjusted carefully, that flow prevented stale, mold-prone air without allowing icy drafts to reach the crates. Humidity was as important as temperature. Root crops and certain cured meats keep best at high relative humidity, near 80 to 90%, so they don't shrivel. Too dry and potatoes dehydrate. Too wet and they rot. Martha's clay floor and straw lining balanced that humidity, while her jars and salted bundles prevented mold. She stacked root crops by respiration rate, potatoes on the lower, cooler shelves, onions higher, where air could circulate. Capacity matters. Built as above, a chamber of Martha's size could hold roughly 2,000 pounds of mixed roots and cured meat, enough to feed a family of 6 at conservative rations for 5 to 8 months. That was not speculation. It was the arithmetic of survival. When neighbors saw the neat rows of jars, the salted hams tied and hung, their skepticism shifted into calculation. On paper, it seemed unlikely. In practice, it was the difference between life and ruin. The storm arrived earlier than most expected. What began as a gray sweep of cloud hardened into sustained gale and snow that would not slack for days. Outside, temperatures dropped to -40 degrees, and the wind bent the prairie into dunes. Chimneys plugged with rime, roofs crunched under the added burden, thinly framed outbuildings sagged. Several homesteads lost their smoke outlets and feared smoke inhalation. Others found their outdoor stores buried and spoiled under melt and freeze cycles. Martha's family did not face the same immediate threat. The cellar hatch, set low on the lee side and covered with packed straw and sod, took the first assault of snow. As drifts rose, neighbors in panic tried to reach caches and barns, but found themselves cutting through 6 to 8 foot ramps of drift to reach doors. Roads became impassable. For 3 straight days, the valley was a white prison. Inside Martha's chamber, the air remained near 38 to 42 degrees. A single small oil lamp in the vestibule, carefully tended and vented, provided light for tending supplies without introducing dangerous heat or smoke into the storeroom. Body heat from the family and a handful of neighbors who sheltered there added a degree of warmth. But the real guard was the earth itself and the insulation over it. The humidity held steady. Jars showed no bloom. Salted meat remained supple. Children were the most vulnerable. They required concentrated calories and shelter from the bitter wind. Martha's store allowed measured portions of stewed root mash, thin broth from preserved stock, and carefully rationed slices of cured pork. When one neighbor's roof collapsed under the snow, the family fled to Martha's yard and threw her hatch into the cellar. 12 children in the valley, some from Martha's household and some displaced, ate and slept under that packed earth for the storm's worst nights. There were tense moments. A neighbor arrived with a frozen lamp and a cough, bringing word that the mill could not open and that feed for livestock was buried. A small ember mistended might have filled the vestibule with smoke. Martha's ventilation and the family's discipline, no open fire in the chamber, kept that from happening. In one long, cold hour, the wind hurled itself against the hatch, and a walkway of snow began to block the entry. 2 men dug the lee path deeper and packed a windbreak. They adjusted the upper vent with practiced fingers and kept stale air moving out. By the storm's 4th dawn, the worst had passed. Outside the valley was a shattered white, fences half sunken, the smoke from broken chimneys thin against the bright sky. Inside the root cellar, canned fruit, packed roots, and salted meat were intact. The children, who had slept through the roar, woke with warm cheeks and steady hands. Where some families had lost entire winter stores to water and rot, the families that had access to preserved underground stores had rations to last until the thaw. Neighbors came slowly to the hatch, blinking against the glare. Some approached with broken humility. "You called it a waste," one man said, looking at the neat stacks, sheets of cured meat, jars, and straw bundles. "We were wrong." That evening, the yard filled with hushed talk, measured with the careful planning that comes after crisis. Observers counted the saved children, tallied the stores, and did the simplest arithmetic. Martha's summer work had converted to months of food. When the blizzard ate the fences and roofs, the thought of a summer's work turned into the settlement's salvation. Spring brought mud and bright work. Where the storm had been worst, new cellars were plotted. Men and women who had mocked Martha now borrowed her measuring rope and her plans. They learned to set the hatch on the lee side, to layer bark beneath the sod, to make a small, closable vestibule that keeps wind from pouring directly into the chamber. The settlement traded seed lists and cellar measurements. What had been a solitary and odd measure became communal resilience. Numbers matter. Where two families had lost their winter stores entirely last cycle, this time at least 6 families in the valley had cellars or similar winter-proofed storage by early spring. Estimates, drawn from neighbors' records and shared counts, suggest that Martha's example prevented what might have been the starvation or migration of a dozen households across the valley. The immediate effect was concrete: food available when roads were impassable, fewer livestock lost to exposure, children in school again sooner because calories were secure. The social effect was as large. A method once labeled foolish gained respect. Martha, who had been spoken of in passing with a sour smile, found people offering help and seeking instruction. She taught how to pack the floor with sand and clay, how to tie and salt meat to avoid spoilage, how to arrange jars to allow air to move without drafts. She insisted on safety: no open flames in the chamber, a ventilated lamp in the vestibule only. Those standards reduced the risk of smoke and of accidental fires. Practicality spread. In the years after, some families refined the technique: thicker insulation, small cellars adjacent to barns for easier access, and shared community caches for the most vulnerable. The memory of that winter, fixed in diaries and in the oral accounts of children who had been small then, became a lesson in how preparation, not pride, saves lives. By spring, the neighbors who'd called her foolish were asking for her help. The cellar built by Martha Hayes did more than hold food. It held a lesson about how communities endure. As technology moved forward, silos, canned food in quantity, later mechanical refrigeration, these low-tech methods slipped from common use. Yet the principle remains: use the slow, steady properties of earth and careful preservation to turn seasons into survivable months. Today, archaeologists and local historians find traces of similar storage across the region: depressions, packed clay floors, shards of jar glass. The lesson is practical counsel for our own times. Small investments in preparation, paired with knowledge sharing, can prevent catastrophe. That is the quieter engineering of survival. If forgotten frontier survival knowledge speaks to you, consider subscribing and joining the journey. We'll keep pulling these lessons back into the light. Next time, we'll examine a chimney design that stopped smoke poisoning in a mountain settlement and the precise calculations that made it safe. These were not tricks of luck. They were deliberate choices, and they still matter.